Hello guys, and welcome to my third episode of this series where I will go into more detail about the three different phases of the Emperosh, starting with the first one, making AP to get first place, also maintaining this AP if you want to stay Emp for a little bit longer, or if the competition is very fierce you'll have to be able to maintain the AP flow. The second is going to be about the Emperosh itself, which means when you are first place new alliance decides to push what I called in the introduction video the ring, which is the 6 keeps surrounding the Imperial city. And my last last part is going to be about the Emperor. So once you get the buff, what do you actually get? What is the skill line? I will go into detail and explain what the skill line is and what it actually gives you, so you can maybe start to think for yourself, what can I do with this? Because as I said, if you want to prepare, you will have to think in advance once you get the buff what you want to play with it. But first things first, about the alliance point grind. So during those, one thing you need to understand is if you want your AP grind to be efficient, the best thing to do is to have experience of how the flow of the campaign is going. It's quite difficult on the beginning of the campaign, but usually there's patterns where it's always the same. For example, busy daytime will always be from around, at least on my server, from around 5 or 6 in the afternoon, when most people have finished work or school, up until midnight before people usually go to bed. This is what I call the busy prime time, and you'll be grinding AP differently than when you're playing in the off hours or the empty hours, which is usually from midnight all the way to at least 10 in the morning. And you will be playing on both. You will be playing on prime time and you will be playing on off hours if you want to get the AP in. So I'll explain how to efficiently, in my opinion, make the most out of these two different times, because you have to play very differently to make AP. So first, during prime time, what I recommend, since it's when there is the most activity, the most things going on, and also the most lag, take advantage of the busyness of it, the action, and try to be where the action is. Follow where the AP flows. Like if there is a blue road keep to defend, you defend blue road keep. If, like here, we're defending areas, so what am I doing? I'm defending areas. You could also potentially go on empty keeps and just turn the resources there, but that's something I personally rather do on a different time. So when it's busy prime time, you can just easily follow the AP flow and get the big defense ticks on. That's also exactly where it's going to be very important that you're carrying enough travel stones with you, because you won't be having enough time when lots of things are under attack to just like right there with your horse. You have to be very fast and just use a travel stone to the nearest keep and put in some stone and leech the defense tick. That's all it's about. Just leech the defense ticks. Another thing you have to be careful about when playing during prime time is stay in the keep until you get the tick. That's something that I had to train myself, because I missed a few defense ticks with this, because I usually try to help people rather than leech the AP. So I just ran off and helped that guy who was fighting 100 miles away from the keep and didn't get the death tick, or didn't get the whole death tick. So the thing is, you also probably have to train yourself is wait until your death tick comes in, even if that means sitting 10 minutes in a keep and not doing anything. That's how it is, because that's how you get the big defenses ticks. Another thing is when it's just like this busy, if you have to go AFK, go get your food, your dinner, also try to put yourself in a busy keep and just be mindful you don't get AFK kicked, but try and stay where the action is so you get the ticks eventually, passively. Just soak in the AP. Also, another thing that's very important is when it's prime time, never get the AP buff. Don't risk getting stuck into a dungeon in an infinite queue just to get that stupid 10% AP buff. It's not worth it, because there is enough action going on in Cyrodiil on prime time to make up for the AP buff you get from dungeons. Because I guess, well, if you know, that's awesome. If you don't know, that's okay, you'll know after this. When you go into a delve and you kill the boss in a delve, you get a buff that lasts for an hour, and that increases your alliance points gained by 20%. And I know that most people like just get the buff to get more AP, but don't do it during prime time, because when you go into a delve, you are teleported in another instance outside of Cyrodiil. And when you go there in prime time and there's 3 bars, most of the time people have a queue. What do you think will happen if you leave the instance to get the buff when people are already in queue to enter Cyrodiil in the first place? You get stuck in a loop and then you can't come back, and it can take 20-30 minutes until you actually can come back, and you could just be stuck in a dungeon. So when it's prime time and you have 3 bars on, never get the buff. It's not worth it getting stuck in an infinite queue. And that's also why it's important when you play during the day to just check how many bars there's on. You can still get the buff during daytime if there's 2 bars, no problem. But most of the time during busy hours, prime time, it's not worth it getting the buff in my opinion, because that's where the most activity is going on anyways. So you have more AP in the long run consistently without trying to get the AP buff when there's 3 bars on and your fraction has a queue. Then secondly, because you also eventually play during the off hours, which is most of the time what people call night shift. It's when most people are sleeping, the map is quiet, it's very quiet, there's not much going on. Every now and then there's a bit of a small scale group attacking this keep, but nothing else is really going on. That's where you'll get the buff. That's when you need to go to the delve, get your sweet AP buff, and what you're gonna do with it, it's very easy. Since you probably won't have enough people to actually take a keep or defend a big keep, unless there's still some night capping going on. And even then, you just go to enemy home keeps. That's how I did it. I just went to yellow home keeps, and I just turned the resources for the whole night. So that's like the other thing, just turn the resources. If you have a small group, you can eventually maybe take an outpost or something, but don't defend it. Just take the resources, let them flip, take them back. It's quite boring, but it's also very nice because you can use it to rest. You don't have to do much, you don't risk much, you just take AP all the time. Another thing to do, as you can see from my screen, I included, is this screen you will see a lot. You will see this pretty much all the time. Just repair. That's something you also have to do, but mostly during prime time. Or also doing off hour if you manage to defend things or attack or take some keeps, is defend, is repair. Don't hesitate to repair all the walls at 100%, and don't forget about the corners. The bigger keeps always have corners that disappear when you're capping their resources. These corners can be repaired, and most of the time people don't bother because it takes some time away when you could be doing other things. But when you're pushing Emp, you're not really playing the map. What you're doing, you're just making AP. It's very selfish, but you're just making the AP in order to, when your alliance is pushing you, to be still in first place. Also, one last thing I will talk about when you're pushing AP in Greyhorse, when there's a lot of competition, it will happen that some people, either someone who will be ahead of you or someone who is on your heels, is going to try to ask you to leave. Or if you're very tight on getting first place, it's one of the aspects that it can be quite stressful, but I actually also quite enjoyed it, was the whole social thing. Like, you need to interact with these people who are also in the leaderboard sometimes, not always, to ask them nicely, hey, I want to do my first M push, do you mind if I just get it once and then I stop pushing? Or asking someone, or like if someone else is asking you, hey, I'm just also making the M push, do you mind stepping down? You can explain to that guy eventually, yeah, I'm just making my push for once or twice or like 3 times, and then I let you down. It's important, because if someone has never had their emp, it's quite comforting to know, yeah, this guy said he's gonna step down, maybe eventually you have to stick with your word and step down for them to pass, so that the trust is not broken. But it's something that cannot be overlooked, in my opinion, if it's your first M push and you've never been M before. Obviously, it's quite different when you've been playing for a very long time, you've been having lots of M pushes, it's very different. But that's also one of the reasons, me personally, I waited for so long before I did it. Because I needed the occasion, and because I trusted that when people saw me pushing, no one would say anything, and everyone was helpful. And that's exactly what happened. No one said anything, and everyone was quite helpful. So it's all about, in my opinion, or for me it was, building some kind of trust when you have a lot of competition. And that can be sometimes quite difficult, because you'll see with sleep deprivation it can be very stressful communicating with others. But that's one of the things that's part of this experience. So now I'm going to talk about the M push itself. It's pretty straightforward. Once you are at rank 1 and your alliance decides to push, what is going to happen is your objective is going to be to take the 6 keeps surrounding the Imperial City, or in other words, push the Emp ring. Usually in Greyhorse, the Emp push starts when one of the faction has a temporary numerical advantage, which means they will temporarily dominate the map. It can sound pretty boring, but that's usually how it goes, because in order to get these 6 keeps, you need to be able to spread your resources as an alliance thinner to get all the keeps and hold them, so that all keeps are read before someone has the occasion to flip one of the other M keeps. So usually you need to have a numerical advantage. Most of the time it's going to be at least in the tent at the moment is going to be late evenings, around 2 in the morning or 3 in the morning, if not later, because that's usually when people go to sleep. And one of the alliances will at least have one bar active, which is more or less 20 to 30 players. Also, emperors and the numbers in general of emperors an alliance can have is a very good indicator, in my opinion, of the balance of power. Because in order to get an emperor, you need to have a numerical advantage. I like to say it's temporarily, but in some alliances it's not temporarily. Where you will have one alliance who just dominates the whole map. So it's a good indicator of the balance of power for the campaign also, by the numbers of emperors that get crowned from one alliance. If the balance of power is very tight, you will usually get one emp in the evening and one other emp in the morning. So that's also a very good indicator for that. On prime time, if you try to push, that's arguably where it's the most difficult, because all the alliances are active and it's going to be very competitive, and that will also feel like everyone is stacked against you. For example, me, I started my push at around 8 in the evening, when most of the people that play in my group are starting to run in groups. That's when I started to run my push, because the people were here, which also coincides with it being prime time. So I did not get my amp until at least 3 or 4 in the morning at this moment, because the alliance was quite competitive with blues, and it took a very, very long time. I think it took me at least 6 hours or 8 hours of pushing amp, or trying to push amp. So when you start pushing, sometimes don't expect, especially if you're playing in a competitive campaign, don't expect it to be fast. It's sometimes still it's part of the grind. I also pushed my amp a second time, because on the first time I was too tired to actually enjoy it. I pushed my amp a second time and it still took me over 6 hours, more or less, to get my second amp the day after. So yeah, it is quite an investment in time, while all this time having to stay at rank 1 and still managing to maintain the AP flow. Also, it's quite important to coordinate with your group, if you have several groups running, and with your alliance. It can be quite enjoyable. For me it was, trying to coordinate with different guilds and different groups. Yeah, we go to this keep and then another group tries to be a diversion at some other keeps, or go to the enemy home keeps. It's quite different, and it kind of brings, at least it was for me, it tends to bring an alliance together when several guilds and groups are working for this one objective, because as you probably know, sometimes groups tend to have, even though they play for one campaign, they have very different objectives. Some groups want to farm enemy alliances and just make AP and don't care about the map. Some group will be stubbornly trying to take back the north at all costs and then never hold it. Talking about experience, some people will just go to Drake for 3 hours and then just hold it until eventually no one's here anymore to protect it, and it gets flips anyways. So the nice thing with Emperosh is it tends to bring these separate groups together for one objective, and that's really both enjoyable and quite powerful at the same time. So yeah, once you get to the Emperosh, don't be disappointed if it takes a very long time, and if you have to start over and over again, because sometimes that's how it's going to have to be. Also, once you push, don't obsess about making AP anymore. just focus on this one thing and trying to turn the keeps, you will, because as you see, the turning the ring will most of the time happen late night, so it's easier to just focus on it rather than just on AP farming. So yeah, and that's pretty much it. As you see, I made my emp, I got my emp, and now I will go into the detail of, I will showcase you my stats at this time, and I will then go into the details of pretty much how are the buffs, what does the Emperor skill line actually do, and how you can prepare yourself and build for it. So as you can see, these are my stats on the back bar with Wretched Vitality, Gossamer and Magma as sets, and the same sets on the front bar with the resto stuff empowered. So now I will go into a little bit more detail about the Emperor skill line. As you saw before, when you get Emperor, you get also an additional skill line, which will only be active in the campaign you are currently Emperor in. So for example, if you make Emperor in Greyhorse and you decide to go play in Blackreach, the skill line will not be, you will not have the skill line anymore because it's only active in the campaign when you are currently Emperor. As same as when you lose your Emperor, you will lose the skill line. Another thing is the skill line unlocks at max rank and you do not need to spend any skill points into it. It will just be unlocked for as long as you hold and have Emperor. So now let's get right into it. So the first passive of the Emperor skill line is called Emperor. It increases your max stats, which means health, magicka and stamina by 55%. The second passive is Monarch, increases your healing received for yourself by 50% in your campaign. The third is Authority, it increases your ultimate generation by 100% in your campaign, which means you can have ulti up very fast. Domination increases your magicka, stamina and health recovery by 100% while you are in your campaign. And the last one, Tactician, increases your damage done with siege weapon to keeps and other siege weapons by 100% while you are in your campaign. Okay guys, this is gonna be it for this video. I hope this has been somewhat helpful if you want to make your own Emperosh again or your first Emperosh. Keep in mind this is mostly from my own perspective and the little experience I gathered as I did my first Emperosh. I suppose people who have had several Emps and played for several years may have a different opinion, or just by the force of experience more knowledge into regards of Emp. Also keep in mind with this patch was played during pre-High Isle, so it was the patch just before, it was in May this year, so pretty long time now from the posting. Things like Oakensor were not meant and put into the game just yet. Also keep in mind that with update 36 Emperor passives will change drastically, since the buff will now scale with the amount of homekeeps the alliance holding Emp actually owns. Personally, I will have to see how it feels on console before I can have a valid opinion, but from at first sight I actually like it, because at heart I like the tactic play. I like when you need to make the decisions between, do I push for my Emp, do I need to hold my homekeeps. It forces strategy and coordination with other players, and this is something I actually really enjoy in this game, even though it has been quite lacking in the last few campaigns in PlayStation 4. Thank you for watching and see you hopefully very soon. Bye bye!